We opened these days in New Haven, then Hartford, my hometown, big excitement, then New York, Thursday night. The New York opening at the Court Theatre on 48th Street, the reviews were withering. I was praised. Friday night, everyone seemed a bit down. Not I, of course. I'd been praised, and that was the only part of the review, which anyone with any sense, well, certainly it's the only part that I read. To me, it was a hit. Just before my entrance, one of the stagehands patted my shoulder. "Well, you don't need to worry, honey. You'll get another job in no time." "What do you mean?" I said. "We're closing Saturday," he said. "Oh, that," I said, pretending to, of course, know that. All the actors were piling into Hopkins' office to find out if he had another job for them. I thought, well, he knows where I am. If he wants me, he'll send for me. And so he did. Saturday night, report, Schubert Theatre, New Haven. Sunday noon, to understudy Hope Williams in Holiday. I fitted right into the understudy job. Hope Williams was a big star overnight, a charmer with a unique delivery, great boyish looks. After being in Holiday as Hope's understudy for about 2 weeks, Luddy and I decided to get married. My grandfather was visiting in Hartford, and I had a pretty dress, a Babani. It was crushed white velvet with an antique gold embroidery, sort of around the neck and down the sleeves and down the front a bit. So I told Arthur Hopkins that I was leaving the theatre, and we were married in the Hartford living room, with all the families present. We went to Bermuda for our honeymoon. Luddy was always an angel of understanding, luckily for me. I said, "Oh, yes, we'll live in Stratford, Pennsylvania," and we began looking for a house. Well, my enthusiasm lasted about 2 weeks, and we moved back to New York, and we centered ourselves in his New York apartment, 146 East 39th Street, and I went to Hopkins, and I asked for my old job back. He said, "Yes, of course, I expected you." "Really?" I said. "Oh, yes, yes," he smiled. Poor Luddy, a proper wife for 2 weeks. Oh, Luddy, Luddy, look out. Later on in the fall, when Holiday was preparing to go on the road, Jimmy Hagan, the stage manager, called me at midnight. "Hope's sick," he said. "We're playing the Schubert Riviera Theatre on Upper Broadway. She doesn't think that she can play tomorrow's Saturday matinee and evening and then open Monday in Boston." So I went on. Yep, I went on in Hope's clothes. Now I'll never know how. I was inches taller than Hope. It was there and then that I found out how good Hope was and how I had to find my own personality in the part, not imitate hers. It was a baptism of fire. Places where she'd got roars of laughter, I got nothing at all. And by the third act, anyway, I found my way a bit. The rest of the cast were as excited as I was, and very helpful. Hope had asked me during the New York run if I would like her to stay home one night so that I could get a chance to play the part. I'd had the sense to say, "Oh, no, 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 just stay well." I was right. It's a poor second best at best to go on for anyone. After the big pond, after I had been fired, my pictures went into New York City, and they were in a stand on the sidewalk outside the Bijou Theatre on 45th Street. A man named Henry Salisbury at Paramount saw them, and he called me and asked me if I would make a test. Well, I thought, that would be dumb, wouldn't it? I'm not even an actor. I'm just a photograph. They'd sign me for very little. I'd have no control over what I did. I saw Mr. Salisbury, and I said just that. But I added, if I ever do make a test for anyone, I will make one for you. I thought that was very gracious of me. He took me in a big limousine to see the opening of a play with Jack Dempsey. Heavens, I thought, is this the big time? Don't hobnob with the bosses. You lose your mystery. I had no agent. Some people had agents then, but they did not control the business as they do today. Once or twice I went to offices. I went and I sat, and at the end of the day, the secretary, whoever it might be, would come up to me and say, "Why are you here?" The only incident of note was when I said to producer Al Wood's secretary, "I'm here to see about the girl in A Farewell to Arms." "Oh," she said, "that's been cast for a long time." She had a warm heart. "Come on in," she said, "and meet Mr. Woods anyway." So I did. He had a warm heart too. I asked him who was going to play the part, and he said it was Landy. That was all there was to it. Lest they think that I was making any effort, I used to get myself up in a sort of slouch costume. I had an old stocking cap, or no hat, in a day of hats, and an old green tweed coat, and I'd pin the coat together with a safety pin, throw a sweater over my shoulders, string my hair a bit, very casual for those days. I wanted to look as if, well, it's really nothing to me if I got the part or I didn't. I had a car, and that gave me a sort of confidence. At least I could arrive cool. Actually, I didn't go out often to seek work. I was lucky. I was at the Empire Theatre one night. A perfect stranger came up to me, a man, and said, I beg your pardon, but are you in the theatre? I'd like to be, I said. May I give you a letter, he said, to the Theatre Guild? Thank you, I said. That was in 1929. The man was Maurice Wertheim, and he was one of the backers of the Theatre Guild. And do you know who he was? I just found out. He was Barbara Tuchman's father. She was the author of such books as The Guns of August and The Proud Tower. I presented my credentials to the Theatre Guild. The letter from Maurice Wertheim worked like magic. I met Terry Hepburn, also a Bryn Mawr, Lawrence Langner, Philip Muller. They were doing a play of Sam Behrman's called Meteor. Would I like to read for the ingenue? The Luntz was starring. Yes, I would. They gave me the script. Now, I may not have been able to keep a part, but I could get any part. I just had the knack. I could boil up out of nothing at a moment's notice. Didn't really matter whether I read the script or not. I could arrest their attention. I could laugh. I could cry. I was fast. It used to fascinate me. I'd think of nothing for days except I was going to read for something or see someone. I'd eat. I'd exercise. I'd sleep the moment. Then I'd drive over in Luddy's car, and I'd be wound up tight like a steel trap, and I'd go to the bathroom 45 times before I left. Then I'd have to case the office for the bathroom before I went in. I was always very early, and then I went in, and I read, and I was in a sort of coma of excitement. I was never easy with people, I suppose. I was in an agony as to whether I was making a good impression, but the concentration was total, not based on an intellectual conception of the part, not at all, just based on the universal spark. I'd think, spark the part, spark the person, spark the audience. Strike it, light it. When all that energy became boxed, so to speak, and it couldn't get out, then I just didn't come off. I was always very aware of whether I was boxed or fluid. Take a bath, cold, hot, relax. How's the motor running? The intellectual part of studying came as a sort of framework, but the spark of life was, well, the spark of life is the spark of life. Laurette Taylor's great story, she was doing the Glass Menagerie. Laurette always seemed to me, Spencer Tracy too, both Irish, both troubled ones. She seemed to me to sort of sketch, be the inside of the part, the outside of the part, just indicate, dialing the phone, indicate anything that the audience had in its immediate experience, suggest it, let them get it, then get on with it, effortless, easy. Then suffuse, illuminate the character. One could never see the wheels go round. It was always a happening. There was a framework indicated. It was all magic. Spencer playing the flute as Judge Timberlane, lighting a cigarette with one hand, bad day at Blackrock, not heavily worked over characterization. Sketch it. They were my ideals, those two. I had first seen Laurette in the Glass Menagerie in Chicago. I was crossing the country with Terry Hepburn, Theatre Guild, flying L.A. to New York. One stop, Chicago. Terry said to me, Kate, would you like to stop and see Laurette's Glass Menagerie? Tennessee Williams? Yes, I would, I answered. I'd heard wonderful stories about Laurette from George Cukor, and I wasn't about to miss this opportunity of meeting Miss Taylor. We went to the Blackstone Hotel, then to the theatre, and backstage before the play, early. There was Laurette. She was sitting at her dressing table, nothing of a robe on, thin, fine, blonde, reddish hair, pin curls, just putting makeup on, dipping into this, dipping into that. Those eyes, blonde eyelashes, eyebrows, so far apart, so wide open, conveying a multitude of wild and moving and funny thoughts. Soft, big mouth, nose sort of verging on the clown, a vulnerable, sandy, Irish-skinned, ruddy look. George Cukor said once about visiting old stars when they're making up that they're surrounded by any number of empty jars, and they dip their fingers into the jar, and then they rub their cheeks pink, and they rub their lips red, and they rub their eyelids blue, violet. A line here, a line there, a powder puff, the lashes become black, all memory and magic. She undid her hair, sort of brushed it out, poked it up. She was like Spence. They were both like baked potatoes, fundamental, basic, nothing fancy, rough in a way, and all the time talking and funny and like a clown. The top variety, this was her life. She could do it. She knew how to do it in her bones. The minute she got to that little room, to the antechamber, a few strokes here, there, no agony of preparation, like the method, no constipation. She and Spence, they were able to show you, tell you, make you feel, arrest you, make you watch. It was the real life. The daily Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, with which they were unable to cope. That's what tore them apart. She was talking about Julie Hayden, who played the part of her daughter in The Glass Menagerie, and how at the curtain, when they were taking their bows, Julie had turned her back on the audience and knelt before Lorette. Really, I don't blame Julie, let's face it. One would feel inclined, but Lorette thought that was the bunk. She said, "Don't do that, my dear. I'll give you a push. I'll send you sprawling." Anyway, to get back to the point, Lorette's great story. Julie Hayden had been struggling with her part. Several months later, I saw the play again in New York. Julie seemed to me to be very much better. I said so to Lorette. Yes, she said, she's having a good time doing it, too. That's very important, having a good time. She went on, "I remember when I did Peg of My Heart the second time after a 5-year lapse. We opened in Philadelphia. The critics went on about how brilliant I was, how remarkably I'd grown in the part, on and on. Going back to New York to open the play there, I said to my husband, Hartley Manners, 'Isn't it nice that they think I'm so great?' He smiled and said, yeah, nice. But I like the way you used to do it, remember? You had such a good time." Lorette said she was furious with him. She wouldn't speak to him. And then she got to thinking, and she realized what a subtle and brilliant remark it was. It became her key. If you are aware of the expert work and the effort, it's tiring to an audience. This is true, oddly, whether the play is comic or serious. Anyway, I read Meteor in a state of great excitement, and the next day I went back to read. I got the job. Then the same thing happened, which always happens in the theatre. I got another call, the Schuberts. Would I please come and read for the leading part in Death Takes a Holiday? Well, yes, I would come right away. Oh, dear, I thought, what about Meteor? Well, try, pick the best. They sent me the script. I read it. I was swept off my feet. It seemed to me a wonderful part, romantic young girl going away with death, and a leading lady, and Philip Merivale and James Dale, Lawrence Marston directing. I read for it. I got it. So I decided that I must tell the Guild that I had a better offer. I did this, feeling a bit cheesy, walking away from the Luntz and the Guild. But my character, Grazia, in Death Takes a Holiday, seemed to me just a perfect offer. I couldn't resist it. We went into rehearsal. From the start, there seemed to be, there seemed problems. I had to scream. I used to go down into the John of the theatre and scream away. Never did get that scream to work. We went to Washington. The National Theatre opened. I got one rave, a new Maud Adams, and one roast, a new girl looking for all the world like a death's head with a metallic voice. Then we opened in Philadelphia again. One rave, one roast for me. I had not the vaguest suspicion that anything was dangerously wrong. That Wednesday night, the production man came back at half-hour and said, "Mr. Schubert is giving you the privilege of resigning from the cast." "Oh, yes, I see," I replied, holding on to my senses. "Will you tell Mr. Schubert that I have no intention of resigning from the cast? So if he wants to fire me, you go ahead and fire me, and shut that door now, and get out. I've got to give a performance tonight." I had to tell you, Kate, now before the show, he said, "otherwise we'd have to pay you an extra week's salary." "Poor kid," I said, "just get out." Well, fired. I called home. I told Dad and Mother what had happened. That was the spring of 1930. I seemed to be getting nowhere. That summer I went for 2 weeks to Europe with Eunice Stoddard. Then I went to Stockbridge to Alexander Kirkland and Howard Strickling's company to play whatever turned up. My friend Laura Harding went with me. We were both Francis Robinson Duff pupils. Laura seemed very sophisticated to me. Luddy was hard at work in New York and would come up as often as he could. Then came Art and Mrs. Bottle. Kenneth McGowan and Joseph Verna Reed were going to do this play by Ben Levy with Jane Cowell and Leon Quatermain and G.P. Huntley Jr. and Noah Coward's friend Joyce Carey, Clifford Brooke, directing. They had already done Twelfth Night. Art and Mrs. Bottle was to be the second play of a repertory season at the Maxine Elliott Theatre on 39th Street off 6th Avenue. They sent for me. I went up to see them. I read for them. They seemed to like me, and I was signed for the part. Any kind of English or wasp part I had a good chance at in those days. They didn't import too many English actors, and there weren't too many accents available. I was to get $125. We went into rehearsal. I wore my old rags to rehearsal, as they do today, but then it was not heard of, and I wore no makeup, only bright red lipstick. Ben Levy, the author of the play, thought me totally unattractive as to looks, as to personality, and as to talent. What does she do? Does she wash her face with yellow kitchen soap every morning? Ben Levy was almost right. I did fancy a sort of polished look. Jane Cowell took me aside. She said she liked me very much, but that Ben Levy was not accustomed to this type of American looks, and would I mind if she made me up to sort of soften my appearance, which she assured me that she liked, but that he didn't. So she made me up, and it didn't help. Ben Levy still found me unattractive, and they let me go. I, of course, thought they were stupid, and they'd rue the day. Well, they did. I was right. And after a week, they called me back. I said that they would have to pay me $150 instead of $125, as they'd hurt my dignity. I was traveling on pretty safe ground because I knew that everyone liked me but Levy, and they were running short of time, and they had tried all the available girls in town. They gave me the $150. They were a bit shocked by my Yankee trading. We opened. I made a hit. Noah Coward came to see the play, climbed up 5 flights to the dressing room, to my dressing room, to tell me that I was very good and to keep at it. I was in the process of discovering the enormous generosity and enthusiasm of people in the theatre. Often one hears of jealousy. I've never met it. I think it is such an obvious field for jealousy that everyone with any sense starts early in the fight against it. The season closed. I went to Iverton, Connecticut. Lawrence Anholt and Milton Stiefel ran a very good stock company there. Iverton was where I really learned a lot. They gave me a job as a sort of half-leading lady. I played when they couldn't get someone well-known. I'd done very little at this point in the theatre, but I was sort of known in the neighborhood because of Dad and Mother. We did The Man Who Came Back, we did Cat and the Canary, and then I did the lead in a play called Let Us Be Gay, which had starred Francine Larimore. That winter, during this summer at Iverton, the Gilbert Miller office called. Philip Barry had written a play called The Animal Kingdom. Leslie Howard was to star in it. There were 2 principal women's parts, his wife, his mistress. Phil wanted me to play the mistress, Daisy Sage. I read the script. I was transported. It was a wonderful part. It was really Howard's 2 separate lives, so that the 2 segments were separately rehearsed. The play was to go into rehearsal in about 4 months. Of course, I would wait. Oh, yes, I'd wait. And I agreed on terms with the Miller office. but I had not actually signed the contract. Luddy and I went to Europe that year. The time passed quickly. This would absolutely make me a star. The rehearsal started about November of 1931. I went dressed as neatly as possible in high heels. This was my first mistake. It made me taller than Leslie Howard. From the start, I felt there was something distasteful about me to Mr. Howard. Try as hard as I could to be subservient, sweet, feminine, anything which would tame down my too vivid personality. I struggled. Nothing worked. I remember one hideous moment when I said, "What would you like me to do here, Mr. Howard?" And he answered, "It must have happened. I couldn't have made it up. I really don't give a damn what you do, my dear." The next day we were to rehearse on our set somewhere across town west of 8th. I asked Walter Abel, the man who was my friend in the play, if I could give him a lift. We arrived at the place and I found that they had decided to rehearse the wife scenes instead, so we were dismissed for the day. I told Walter that I'd drive him home on our way uptown on 8th Avenue. I told him how terribly excited I was to have this opportunity, that I felt it would really get me going, that Phil had written this part for me. "Oh," he said, "no, nothing matters that much in this business. Of course, a great part, but there'll be others for you." "Oh, no, not for me." I said, "This is it." I dropped him, and as I was driving to the garage, a sort of feeling came to me. Was he trying to say something? Why didn't we rehearse? Was there something? Oh, no. I went home. As I went in the apartment door, my telephone was ringing. It was my brother Dick at Harvard. He started to tell me about the great party they'd give for my opening in Boston. Foreboding, no, I said, bad luck, don't plan anything. And at that very moment there was a knock on the door to the apartment. "Telegram for you, Miss Hepburn," said Mr. Bryce, the concierge. "Just put it under the door, please, Mr. Bryce." I concluded my conversation with Dick, went over, casually opened the wire. It was from Gilbert Miller, and it read, "Pursuant to Clause C1 in your contract, you are hereby given notice of the termination thereof." Heavens! Fired! I'd waited months for that part, and it was perfect for me. Why? Well, there must be some mistake. I'll call Phil Barry. After endless tries, I got him. "I've been fired," I said to Phil. "Yes, I know," he answered. "But why? Why should I be fired?" "Well, to be brutally frank, Kate, you weren't very good." "Oh, yes, I see. Thank you. Goodbye." I hung up. That was a desperate moment. I'd been fired because I wasn't any good. But I was good, wasn't I? What was wrong? I hadn't been fresh. I'd just shut up. Of course, I felt Howard didn't like me. I mean, I was too big or I was too small, and was something he didn't like. And no money, not a cent, and I'd waited 4 months for that part, and everyone would know about it, and what can one say? Well, you just have to say I was fired. Oh, that was a blow. It stopped me dead in my tracks. I felt so unwanted. I wondered, what was it about me that didn't work? There I was, fired again and very badly thrown. Get busy. The phone rang. Would I like to play with Laurette Taylor in Alice Sit by the Fire? Well, they didn't have to ask me twice. The night of the first day of rehearsal, I got a call from a man named Harry Moses for the Broadway production of The Warrior's Husband. I read the script. It was a wonderful part for me. Yes, I'd give up Alice, Sit by the Fire. If I got that part, I got it. The Warrior's Husband was originally a one-act play written by Julian Thompson. It was a Greek fable about the love affair between Antiope and Theseus. Hope Williams had played the lead, Antiope. Hope Williams is a real product of New York's 400. Easy distinction, independence, integrity, a lovely New York accent, great good looks, a slim figure, a boy's haircut, and a walk. Her walk was an arm-swinging stride. It was stylish, and it was original. Hope obviously had a tremendous influence on my career vocally, walk-wise. I incorporated a lot of hope into my so-called personality. It was in the air, really, that boy, woman. My arrival in the big city was well-timed. Hope had gone away that summer, and when she got back, Arthur Hopkins had found a wonderful new play for her. So I got Hope's Warrior's Husband. We opened cold at the Moroscow Theatre in New York. My whole family came. They were taking no chances this time. I had an entrance down a narrow stairway which ran across the backdrop. It was about 20 steps and steep. Then it swung around to the audience about 4 steps forward. There were lights on the upstage side of this staircase, and it looked thrilling. I had a stag on my shoulder, a tight tunic made of metal links, beautiful silver leather shin guards showing the leg to great advantage, and a silver shield, and a high silver helmet, and a cape, a great costume, and I was very sure-footed. So the fact that the stairs were only about 3.5 feet wide with a high, narrow step and no railings, that didn't bother me at all. And anyway, I didn't mind risking my life for fame. I leapt down the stairs 3 or 4 steps at a time. I rounded the corner. I made one jump for the last 4 steps, threw the stag on the ground, landed on one knee, paying obeisance to Hippolyta, my sister, Queen of the Amazons. The audience, of course, burst into applause. Well, they could hardly do anything else. I'd all but asked for it. But I was unaware. I was just full of the joy of life and opportunity and a wild desire to be absolutely fascinating. At that point in my progress, I was sailing through the air anyway, down a stair, up a stair, no guardrails, hell, no stair whatever, no matter. Life, joy, youth. And I was pretty new. And I was presented to advantage, and I made a hit. The play they quarrelled with. I had it made for the first time, and she was tall and black and hefty and very dominating, and I can't remember her name. Lily comes to mind. I'm not sure, though. And she knew her job, and she got $75 a week, and she got that from me. That's what she wanted. That's what she said she wanted, and that's what she got. I myself was getting $150. The show ran for about 6 months, then we were asked to take a cut. I was cut to $75. She wasn't cut, mine did, so she took the salary that I got as a star. What's money? What's money? Everybody wanted to test me for the movies. Everyone wanted me in something. The agents wanted me. I was arriving. In The Warrior's Husband, I began to feel for the first time like a real actress. My dressing room was on the stage level. It was a charming old theatre, the Moroscow. Oddly enough, right next to the Bijou on 45th Street, opposite Schubert Alley, where the big pond had played, with my photographs on the outside. Both these theatres have been demolished. I didn't go out a great deal. Letty and I still lived in that apartment at 146 East 39th Street. It was a brownstone apartment of 5 stories, apartments front and back. It was charming. The house had a dumbwaiter shaft, and you could have meals sent up from downstairs. The food was delicious. Really a wonderful way to live. I never got very close to anyone in the theatre or movies. I suppose it was because I was a member of a big family, and I always tried to get enough sleep. Sounds odd today when people say, what was he or she like? And I have to answer, I honestly don't know, but there it is. It didn't look as though The Warrior's Husband would survive. What next? David Selznick and George Cukor were looking for a girl to play Sidney Fairfield. The movie. A bill of divorcement. Clement Stain wrote it. An agent in New York, Miriam Howell, who worked for Leland Haywood, the American Play Company, came to see me. Would I test for the part? I said I would like to very much. It was a wonderful part with John Barrymore. She showed me the test scene. I said that I'd prefer to use my own material from Holiday, which I had understudied. They said, okay. I asked Alan Campbell if he would do the test with me. He said yes. Alan was later married to Dorothy Parker. He was a good friend of mine, an actor, sensitive and decent fellow. She was lucky to have him. Well, so was I. A man named Eddie Sens made me up. I seemed to myself to be covered with junk, very white, very thick, red lips, lots on the eyes. After doing the test scene, I took off all that fancy makeup and I put on the makeup which I used in the theatre. Felt more like me, and I did my hair straight back as I did in life. I was determined to have it be me by me. I saw the tests a few days later. I thought, yes, that's not bad, that's not bad. I saw them 10 years later. They were heartbreaking. So desperately anxious, and I looked idiotic in my own makeup and straight-back hair. I thought I was being very nonchalant. Sad. I was far from nonchalant as one could get, actually. It was what I really was. I was a kid, desperate to be in the movies. It had a kind of truth behind the eyes. This test has disappeared, alas. Then I called Paramount and I told Mr. Salisbury that I'd done a test for RKO. Did he want me to do one for him? He said yes. Would I do it in material from The Warrior's Husband? Well, I didn't, and it wasn't very good. Poor material for a test. But I had fulfilled my promise. George Cukor, who was to direct A Bill of Divorcement, liked the test. I was offered the part. After The Warrior's Husband closed, I went down to the station at Harmon to take the 20th Century to Chicago and the Super Chief to Los Angeles to seek my fortune. Laura Harding, my friend, decided that she would go too. It would be fun, and of course that was great for me. So, Laura was already on the train with all her junk and all mine. Laura had 2 dogs with her, Jamie, a Scottie, and Twig, a Shelburne Terrier. The first real friend I had in New York was Laura Harding. She was studying voice too, and she hoped to have a career in the theatre. She and I saw a lot of each other. She knew all the sort of highbrow customs of the time, and I learned the way, the Vuitton luggage, the clothes, where to shop, what to buy. Once we were in Hollywood, people gossiped about Laura and me, and I never knew it. We'd eat lunch in the restaurant on the lot. As you walked into the restaurant, there was a barber shop on the left. In it, a telephone. One day, Laura went in there to telephone me. I was working on the set. The person who answered kept saying, "Who is this? Who is this?" And finally Laura said, "Oh, tell her it's her husband." The director, Mark Sandridge, was having a haircut. He heard this, and he was absolutely shocked. He told me years later he thought that he must have been the one who was responsible for the very strong rumor that we were lesbians. Anyway, the rumor certainly started, and even New York was buzzing with it. Finally, after about 2 years, Laura went back to New York. She worked as an agent for Leland Hayward, who had become my beau. So, as I said, when it came time to go to California for Bill of Divorcement, Laura decided that she would go too. I'd not traveled much in the United States. I'd been to Europe several times. I'd been back and forth to Bryn Mawr. But to go west, Billy Burke and Ziegfeld, very ill, were on the train. Because of Ziegfeld's illness, our car was to be switched across Chicago and tied onto the Super Chief. I remember catching 1 or 2 glimpses of their drawing room. It was hung with special slipcovers, which covered the walls, the chairs, every object in the room. This seemed quite an extraordinary luxury to me, but it was really the thing to do, just as Louis Vuitton luggage was the thing to do. There were any number of musts in those days, which were definite indications, that you knew how to behave. Laura Harding knew what all these things were, and I learned them from her, the baby pillows, the blanket to make the drawing room cozy. This was way beyond anything that we knew about. I'd come from Hartford, Connecticut, a medium-sized town, but sophisticated. I certainly was not in the luxuries. Laura and I had a very exciting trip, wondering what it would be like to be in movies. We got off at every possible stop with the dogs, walked up and down the platform, had dinner in the dining car, lunch and breakfast in our own drawing room. In those days, there was no air conditioning at all. It was hot as hell, so very often we'd open the windows, filthy, so we'd close them. Then it was sweltering. We'd open them again. This particular day, I was looking out the closed window. "Oh, look, Laura, the new moon," I said. No, not through glass, Kate, not through glass. Bad luck, come on." We rushed out of the drawing room, through the train to the platform. To see the moon over my left shoulder and not through glass, I opened the door to go out, onto the platform. Oh, something in my eye. Several things, in fact. Tiny pieces of steel rail, 3 of them. They lodged in my left eye, in the white part of my left eye, scratching the inside of my upper lid every time I blinked. They were there and they wouldn't move. I'd gone to Elizabeth Hawes, New York's highest-priced designer, to have an appropriate costume made to wear getting off the train in California. It was a sort of Quaker blue, silk grosgrain suit. The skirt was flared, very long. The coat was rather like a 19th century riding coat with tails. The blouse was a turtleneck with a ruffle around the top of the turtle, and the hat, well, the hat was a sort of grey-blue straw dish, upside down on my head. I had long hair, screwed up tight. Someone once said à la concierge. The dishpan sat on top of this, a bit formal and more than a little eccentric. But it had been very expensive, the whole costume, and I had a great deal of faith in it. It was, I realize now, hardly an appropriate costume to arrive in Pasadena on July 4th with a temperature of 90-odd. A sweatshirt and an old pair of white pants would have been more appropriate. When we arrived at Pasadena, my left eye under my dishpan hat was bright red, and the other eye in sympathy was certainly pink, agony, and sweating hot. We were slowly coasting into Pasadena, past my first oranges and grapefruits, lemons, the sun, no smog in those days, the beautiful scent of the orange blossoms, and the dry soil, and my red eyes. We were pulling into the station. Suddenly Laura said, "Good God, that's Leland Haywood." "Yes," I answered, "he's my agent." "Head of the Stag Line," said Laura. "What?" I asked. "What?" "When I came out in New York," she said, "all the parties, he was the head of the Stag Line." What a scream! Leland Haywood was standing there with a short, heavy-set man, Myron Selznick by name. They were talking. I was so late at what they were saying. "Which one?" said Myron. Leland said, "The one with the funny hat." "My God, you're kidding," said Myron. "We got $1,500 a week for that." "She's an original," said Leland. "Yeah, very," said Myron. "What does she drink? Get a load of those eyes." After we'd greeted one another, I said, "Look, I have something in my eye. Do you happen to know a doctor?" But Leland interrupted. "Q-Cor's waiting to see you at David Selznick. They want to start as soon as the clothes are ready and the tests are done." And we were off. Soon we drove onto the RKO lot. George Q-Cor's office was small, a bit dark, ground floor. Q-Cor was an extraordinary, rococo fat man, medium height, full of energy, quick, bright, and great fun. "Well, isn't this fine?" he said to me. "Now, let me see. Yes, let me see." He looked me over. He summed me up. He summed Laura up. He looked at me. "Would you mind taking off that hat?" I took it off. My hair was hot and matted. "Would you mind cutting your hair?" "Well," I said. Then he turned to his secretary and said, "Call up Joanne and see if she can come down here." "Who's Joanne?" I asked. "She's the hairdresser," said Q-Cor. "Or better, we'll go up there." A man suddenly appeared in the door, 50-ish, obviously Barrymore. "Well, you're here," he said politely. He looked at me hard. "Too many people in here. Come on out into the hall. I want to say something to you." I stepped out into the hall with him. He smiled. He was very warm, very personal. "That was a wonderful test," he said. "You're going to be a big star." Then he focused on my eyes, reached into his pocket, took out a small bottle, indicated his own eyes. "I have the same trouble," he said. "Try this, 2 drops each eye." "Mr. Barrymore, I have something in my eye." "Yes, dear, I know. Try it." And he was gone. I went back into the office. Do any of you by any chance happen to know an eye..." But Q-Cor was saying, "Now, Shall we go up to meet David Selznick? Then we'll cut your hair." And George led the way, and we went to meet David Selznick, who was busy, and said, "Oh, yes, just fine, fine." He must have thought, well, so that's what we got. Then we went up to the far end of the lot where the hairdresser and makeup departments were. Very speedily my hair was cut off, leaving enough to curl. Head of the makeup wasn't there. Back to Cucor's office. It was late. "Well, tomorrow then," he said, "at 9, I'll call you. Do you happen to know an eye doc? I have something in my..." And I was talking to no one. George and his entourage were gone. They'd just all disappeared. The day was over. Laura and I walked out of the office. On the street outside there was a man standing. "I beg your pardon," I said, "but do you happen to know an eye doctor? I have something in my eye." "Oh, dear, yes, so you have. Well, I'm a doctor, but you need an eye man." He telephoned around. He found a woman doctor who was still in her office. Yes, she'd see us. We went into downtown Los Angeles. That was quite a trip. She took a look. 3 steel filings embedded. I could hear them click against her knife. She got them out. She dug them out. Flick, flick went the white of my eye, like celluloid. The next morning I went to the studio with a patch. A bill of divorcement, which is to be my first picture. John Barrymore, my father, Billy Burke, my mother, Elizabeth Patterson, my aunt, and David Manners, my beau. George Cukor was the director. We quickly had hair tests, makeup tests, got the clothes together. The plan was to shoot all of Barrymore's scenes first and get him out of the picture, save the money. He was expensive. What an odd man, full of charm, a wonderful actor, a generous spirit, a wild sort of general passion for the opposite sex, but really not caring a bit whether or not he succeeded. He asked me to come to his dressing room on the lot one day. I went, knocked on the door. He said, "Come in." I did, and there he was, lying on his couch in what shall I say, comparative disarray. I must have looked totally blank. There was a pause, a quick shuffle of the blankets. Oh, I'm sorry. See you later," he said. I went. Oh, my, how very strange. Anyway, he was an angel after that. Feeble attempt, or whatever you want to call it. His main object after that really seemed to be absolutely certain that I made a big hit. He held my face to the camera in our many scenes together. He was sweet, he was funny, and he could certainly act. I was very lucky to have had such a wonderful opportunity. When I had finished a bill of divorcement, I went to Europe fast with Luddy, on the chance that they would call me and tell me that I was a hit. I went to Schiaparelli's, got myself a costume to get off the boat in, just in case, a 3/4 coat and a skirt and blouse and a knitted hat of knit to, pearl to, very easy to wear. I'd heard in Vienna that I'd made a big hit, so I was prepared. This was my first French outfit. They took the picture to Santa Barbara to preview. It was very well received. When we knew definitely that it was a hit and that I was a hit, Luddy and I switched our tickets from steerage to first class. I'd got off to a flying start with the bill of divorcement, followed by the films Christopher Strong, Morning Glory, Little Women, and then Spitfire, all in the space of 1 year, actually a year and a half. 7 months in 32 and almost all of 1933. I even won an Academy Award for Morning Glory. Then came The Lake. I have to explain to you my next, step. I was sort of full of myself, as you can imagine. All my success in California, and now back to New York, my position was, well, yes, I was secure, and my relationship with former friends was different. I had definitely made it to the first hilltop. I was someone to be reckoned with. Actually, other people put you in this position. They look up to you, and from your new spot you try to pretend that you're unaware of any change. Back in New York, I thought we needed more room. Luddy and I found the house I'm now in. It was for rent furnished, $100 a month. 1932. And so we moved in, and we moved in the little furniture we had, and finally, in about 1937, I guess it was, I bought the same house for $27,500. Luddy only tried to help me in my career. He never mentioned the fact that with Aunt and Mrs. Bottle and the warrior's husband, I was of necessity climbing a ladder which was going to take me away from him. He took care of me. He'd moved his business to New York just so that it would be convenient for me. When I left Luddy and went to Hollywood on July 4th, 1932, it turned out to be the beginning of the end of our marriage. What the hell would I have done without Luddy, my protector? I would have been frightened away from the big city, and I would have shriveled up and I would have died. And Luddy, all he wanted was me. And of course, all I wanted was to be a great big hit in the movies. Now I'm horrified at what an absolute pig I was. Dear Luddy, he'd always meet the train or the plane when I came back from Hollywood. He'd drive me to Fenwick or to Hartford. He took another apartment. We were separated, then we were divorced in Yucatan, Mexico. I didn't think that divorce was any good, but I thought it made our position clear. He continued to do for me any and every possible kindness. You couldn't be expected to believe this, but it was in early 1941, when I was going around with Spencer Tracy, that Spence said to me, "Why do you keep stringing Luddy along? Why don't you stop using him?" And I thought, well, I finally used what sense of sensitivity I had, and I stopped using him, and in about 6 months he was married. He had 2 children, a boy and a girl. Then his wife died. Well, then means 25 years later. Luddy began to be sick. I used to stop and see how he was. Finally, I began trying to do things for him. For a while he'd come to Fenwick. Then he had inoperable cancer, and he'd be in and out of the hospital, and slowly he faded away. I really struggled to give back to him some of the love and the kindness and the extreme selflessness which he'd given to me. But, oh dear, I've left out the most awful instant. Listen to this. I made him change his name from Ludlow Ogden Smith to S. Ogden Ludlow. I didn't want to be called Mrs. Smith. I thought it was melancholic. Kate Smith, and I couldn't even sing. I hope you realize that I'm remembering all this now. I'm looking back and I'm realizing what the truth was, the motives back of the action. I don't think it was, I hope it wasn't all as cold-blooded as it sounds. I hope not. But the truth has to be that I was a terrible pig. My aim was me all the way, up, down, all about. Can you see how responsible Luddy was for my beginning? Absolute generosity. No strings. Give. You just don't find people like that in life. Jed Harris was one of the most successful producers to reach Broadway in the middle of the late 20s. He had endless hits and he made millions. Then he struck a lull until Our Town in 1938. When I first got to New York in the fall of 28, he was flourishing, and I used to drive him around in my car as the 30s began. And then I went to Hollywood, 1932. And when I returned to New York in 33, I was a big hit, and I had won the Academy Award for Morning Glory. As Jed, became less successful, I became more so. Everything I did seemed to work. I apparently thought that I would renew Jed's luck if I did the lake for him. Although his career as a Broadway producer had tumbled, he was still in his own attitude toward himself, and to me, the king of the roost. Modesty was a quality which he did not deal in. He had a way of treating you as if you were sort of an inferior creature, and of course I'd known him when I definitely was on a lower rung of the ladder than he was. Now the situation was reversed, but neither Jed nor I could admit this. He was the genius and I was the lucky mutt. When I got back to New York, I called him to say hello. "Oh, how are you?" he said. "How are you? I was about to call you. Have a play which you might enjoy doing. I'll send it to you." What he sent was The Lake by Dorothy Massingham. My attitude toward the play was really cockeyed. I can't remember what I thought of it as a play, as an evening in the theatre. I think I was anxious simply to be a help to Jed. I hardly dare say this. I actually thought that if I did the play, it would, of necessity, get him back on his feet. I thought that his position must be very embarrassing to him, and now that I was important, I felt that as well as the little mother of all the world, I could help him resume his proper status. How I could have been this dumb, I don't know. My relationship with Jed had indeed been curious. Rehearsals started at the Martin Beck, 45th Street, west of Broadway, big theatre. We weren't worried. We could fill it. Tony Miner was directing. Nice man. I was there doing my enthusiastic best, which wasn't a very dependable best. I was in my mid-20s, had exaggeratedly been referred to as the new Doozer Bernhardt. While I knew that all this adulation wasn't exactly deserved, still, well, I did seem to have something. Just what it was, I wasn't sure, and when it would happen, I certainly wasn't sure either. The acting, I mean, in this was indeed perilous. I could make them laugh, I could make them cry, but the atmosphere had to be perfect. Okay, in movies. Disaster on the stage. Well, after the first week of rehearsal, Jed fired Tony. Helen Hayes, whom I barely knew, sent me a message saying, "Don't let Jed direct you. He'll destroy your confidence." But I was young, I was unique. Oh, I can get on with anyone, I thought. So I disregarded her advice. Why Jed fired Tony Miner, I never knew. I suppose that he just wanted to direct it himself. Tony had given me confidence. The other actors gave me confidence. They were sweet to me. Of course, I know now that they must have been beginning to suspect what they were in for. From the very beginning, Jed seemed to be setting out to destroy my one commodity, my confidence, or else he just didn't like what I could do. If I turned left, he said turn right. If I made a gesture with one hand, he said make it with the other. I sat, he said stand. It was undoing. We opened in Washington. I was terrified. Bit by bit, my confidence had left me, and confidence was all I had. Under perfect circumstances and conditions, I could deliver a sort of naive and forthright laugh and cry, but to force myself to concentrate in a state of terror was still beyond me. At the National Theatre in Washington, D.C., sold out to the rafters, I really walked through the play in a daze. A few things hit, but mostly best. I could actually feel the attention of the audience recede like the tide. I went through the motions. There was no heart in any of it, no joy. Jed came back to my dressing room, stood in the doorway, and said, "Perfection. I could do no more." "No more?" I asked. Well, I didn't understand what he was talking about. "No more rehearsals," he said. "We open in New York next week." I was stunned. Well, couldn't we keep it out for a bit until I know what the hell I'm doing? "Not necessary," he said, and he was gone. Next morning came the reviews. They told me that they weren't bad at all. Now, I don't read reviews. I just don't see the sense. It's too late to help one way or the other. But, of course, I get the general feel, good, bad, great. In this instance, I thought that the critics were just being kind, or perhaps they were reluctant to demolish the new Wonder Girl. My own judgment told me that I had simply failed to deliver, and I set about talking myself into disaster. I got worse and worse, and the New York tickets were selling like hotcakes. We went back to New York. I kept hoping that I'd drop dead, but I didn't. We weren't rehearsing at all, not at all. Now, it could be that Jed felt that he'd over-directed me and that he was letting me find my way back, but by this time, back to where? The trail had grown over. I was lost. Inevitably, they arrived. Dress rehearsal, opening night. Luckily, I was tough. My cue came. I walked on, and I walked through the whole opening night. It was perfectly awful. I was like an automaton. My voice got higher and higher. I prayed to myself. No use, I just went on and on and on and on. I hadn't died. I was there. I was fully conscious of having given a totally nothing performance. My family was there, of course, out front. Noah Coward was sitting right in back of my sister Peg, a beautiful young girl, and he was overheard to say, "Kate's sister looks the way Kate should have, but didn't." Noah came backstage. This time he said, "Yes, you mucked it up, dear, you mucked it up. But that happens to all of us. You'll get roasted. Keep at it. You'll find the way." And indeed I was roasted, and I became the irresistible butt of all the New York wits. Dorothy Parker summed it up. Go to the Martin Beck and Z.K.H. Run the gamut of emotion from A to B. The box office fell at the rate of $1,200 a week. We'd had a very substantial advance for something like 10 weeks, and it began to look as though we'd run just about that length of time. No one with any sense was buying tickets. Those which had been sold could not be returned. The production which had not been expensive would pay off. My main task now was to see whether I could learn to act under fire and to learn how to be a star. I hadn't been either. I'd lost my nerve, I'd moaned, I'd not passed the exam, I had not delivered the goods, and I had let everyone know that I was absolutely miserable and terrified. Well, as one goes through life, one learns that if you don't paddle your own canoe, you won't move. After the shock of the opening, we settled down to the gradual demise. People came out of curiosity, or whatever it is, in diminishing numbers. I, very, very slowly, I was trying to pick up the pieces. I at least had the brains to know who was really at the bottom of the failure. Me.